Right, and then he moves on to say, now this tendency to beg crucial questions is openly exposed by Dr. Stein when the issue pertains to the existence of God, because he demands that the theists present him with evidence for the existence of God. Look, I've got a toenail. It's clipped off by God himself. I've found it in the pantry next to the crackers, and I present it to you. Good, right? Well, no. Theists like myself, it says, will gladly and readily do so. There is evidence for the created order itself, testifying to the wisdom, power, plan, and glory of God. One should not miss the testimony of the solar system, the persuasion of the sea, the amazing intricacies of the human body. There's the evidence of history, God's deliverance of his people, the miracles at Passover night in the Red Sea, the visions of Isaiah, the Shekinah glory in the temple, the virgin birth of Jesus, his mighty miracles, and of course his resurrection from the dead. In short, there's no shortage of empirical indicators or evidences of God's existence. So this is Dr. Bonds saying, this is Romans 1 territory. We look out and we see the intricacies of the universe, and then we look into Romans 1, which is a specific revelation, and see the message that God has for us. And so the Christian idea of who God is, again, remember he's arguing specifically for the Christian God, is that we'll see evidence for him in the universe and also in his own word. So this isn't something that's glanced over or devoided by Dr. Bonson. He says there is these physical indicators and empirical evidences that he could point to, but he's going to take a different way.
Right. So he says Stein wants evidence for the existence of God. I'll give you evidence for the existence of God. And he lists off all this evidence for the existence of God, right? The solar system, the sea, all the human body, how it's put together, God's deliverance of his people, the resurrection of Jesus. So there's all kinds of evidence for the existence of God. But notice he says, but Dr. Stein precludes the very possibility of any of this empirical evidence counting as proof for God's existence. Why? Well, he says, Stein writes, quote, supernatural explanations are not allowed in science.
See our last book about scientism.
Yeah. And so he says, in advance, you see, even before you even get to what the evidence is, Stein is committed to disallowing any theistic interpretation of nature, history, or experience. And so what he seems to overlook, he said, that is what Stein seems to overlook, is that it is just as much begging the question on his part as it is on the part of the theist who appeals to such evidence. He has not at all proven by empirical observation and logic that his pre-commitment to naturalism, is true. He's just assumed it in advance. So he's begged the question, right? By saying no supernatural explanations are allowed in science. Well, wait a minute. Where did that come from, right? That's just an assumption that you're making, and you haven't even proved it, right? You've assumed it in advance. You have a presupposition, a pre-commitment to naturalism that is driving your thinking. And so you don't even look at these various things as evidence, right? You can't even see those things as evidence. You disregard those things as evidence. And he says, look, that's your presupposition. That's your commitment to naturalism.
Right. Right. Yeah. Prove to me that a supernatural being exists. Well, here's a supernatural being. Sorry, can't be supernatural, but you need to prove to me
because there is no supernatural. Right.
So here's a being. Okay. Well, he's not God. Well, you made me take off his deity at the front door and for us to pass through. So, all right. I guess that's where we stand. We can't present any evidence. If we're unable to, we can't have a conversation, and we should pack up and go home. Well, it's important to note that,
and this quote here is actually from Joshua, right?
Right.
It's not
it's in his commentary section at the end, or at the bottom of the book where it belongs. I mean, not that it belongs at the bottom, but in order to help us, it's very important for it to be on the same page. Yeah. So here, our editor Joshua says it's important to note that when Bonson and presuppositionalists explain that everyone begs the question, they're referring to assumptional commitments, and assumptions are merely cognitive states. What is known as the fallacy of begging the question refers to circularity within arguments themselves, and so this assumptional begging the question is not itself fallacious, but merely a conceptual or epistemologically inescapable state of mind. And he says the unavoidable fact is that nobody is a disinterested observer seeing and interpreting the facts without a set of assumptions and pre-established rules. So
And this is so important.
yeah.
This is really important. Yeah, this kind of comment, right?
Yeah. So we talk about, vicious circularity, or just, the logical fallacy of begging the question. And those things are two separate categories where, of circularity. And so, just think about from the basis of logic and reason. Okay. This is the best car to drive, or when I drop in a ball, it will fall down. Well, you're going to use reason and logic in order to make those determinations. But then where do you get that starting assumption from? You have to use reason and logic to get there, but you can't do it, because then it would be begging the question of what's the best way to determine those things. Well, if it's reason and logic, then by asking the question, what's the best reason, I'm using reason, right? So we're at an impasse. If this type of circularity isn't allowed, then we could never get anywhere. And he, again, to reiterate here, says that nobody is a disinterested observer. This isn't someone looking outside the universe, although there might be a person, a being, that is able to exist outside the universe. And they're not seen interpreting the facts without a set of assumptions and pre-established rules. No one's coming to a baseball game and they're just blind, deaf, dumb. They've never experienced anything. Once you see the players start to play, you might not know the rules of baseball, but you're kind of figuring out what's happening, and you're using starting assumptions for that. No one's coming as this tabula rasa of blankness that you have to, how do you figure out what to put in your tool bag? Those choices are pre-existing mind states for you in order to say, oh, well, it seems like the ball is important. Well, how are you able to determine importance and non-importance? Well, that's a pre-existing condition to you, that you think of things as important. So again, I can't even give you a good example of what this blank person is, except dead and have never been born, which can't be dead because you've never been born. So even there, look, I can't do it. So I can't do it. That means nobody can do it.
Yeah.